Welcome to the Extra Mile podcast for bar exam takers. There are no traffic jams along the Extra Mile when you're studying for your bar exam. And now, your host, Jackson Mummy, owner of the Celebration Bar Review.
Well, hey, everybody. Welcome to episode 250 of the Extra Mile podcast for bar exam takers. This is Jackson Mummy. I'm glad to be with you for this special bonus episode. In today's episode, I'm going to be looking at the New York and Texas bar exam results from February 2019. And I'm also going to spend some time talking about some of the recent literature that's been produced about bar results and rates nationally. So even if you didn't take the Texas or New York exam and you're not planning to take either of them, there's still a lot in today's episode that I think is going to be valuable for you. So I hope you'll stick around for that. Now, as I said, this is a special bonus episode. We normally come out every week on Wednesday morning with an episode of the Extra Mile podcast. And we wanted to add this extra bonus to talk about these results and some of the things that are being said. As always, you can check out our podcasts in video or in audio. If you'd like to watch the video version of today's episode, you can go to celebrationbarreview.com/250. That's the episode number. And if you want to listen, you can do so by subscribing in Apple iTunes or iHeartRadio or Spotify, or just about any place that's podcasts are syndicated. And of course, you can always check out all of our podcast episodes in our full archives on our website. There's a button at the top for podcasts, so check that out. And there are show notes on all of those pages. Well, I want to go ahead and jump right into the results that we got. Both New York and Texas released their results at the very end of April. A surprise. We had not been expecting those results as early as they came out. New York never announces when they're going to release results, but typically it's the last couple of days of April, the first couple of days of May, and it's usually done right after midnight. And this year, for unbeknownst reasons, they decided to release on April 24th, a Wednesday, at 6 a.m. Eastern. And of course, that meant that at 6:05, my phone was blowing up. But that's when they released their results. So that was a surprise. It was probably a week, 10 days early. And then I guess Texas didn't want to be left out of the discussion. They were not scheduled to release results until the first week in May. But again, for reasons that are unclear to me, they decided to release their results on the last Friday of April. And there we are. And so their results came out as well. So we want to just talk through those numbers, let you know what we're seeing in the numbers. And then I've got some strategies and thoughts about that as well. And we'll talk about what's being said generally, because now we've gotten several of the big jurisdictions releasing results. Florida's out, Texas, New York. We're really just waiting on California and Georgia. Those are the two big states remaining to release results, and that'll happen later in May. Well, let's turn for a minute to the New York results. And I want to caution you in all of these numbers and results that it's very important that you listen carefully to what kinds of numbers you're hearing and what cohort or group is being talked about. Because as I read the online reports and the newspaper reports and so on, it said, well, in New York, the pass rate was 72%. Well, actually, that's not true. The 72% pass rate from the February 2019 exam in New York was for all ABA graduates who were first-time takers of the bar exam. Now, that's not a great number for that particular group of people. I mean, I can tell you that there was a time when we would be looking in the high 80s or low 90 percentile, but it certainly beats what we see around the country. So you'd think 72%, that's pretty good. But here's the deeper dive. When you add the repeat bar taker pass rate, which was 36%, so half of what the first time rate was, you get a total pass rate for all bar takers in the exam of 45%. So fewer than 50% of the people taking the New York bar in February 2019 passed. And I'm not trying to be negative here. I just think it's important to recognize that most people that are taking the test aren't passing. There were over 4,000 candidates for the exam. And when you get into all of that and you look deeply, the first time takers, represent a smaller number of people taking the exam, a much smaller group. There were 867 graduates from ABA accredited law schools who took the exam for the first time. That's it. So out of the 4,100 people taking the exam, only 867 fit into that cohort that got 72% pass. So when you hear we've got a 72% pass rate, that's just not true. That's not what's going on at all. Now, there's another very significant group in New York, and that's the foreign educated bar takers. And this group, both first-time and repeat bar takers, had a pass rate of only 35%. And I want to emphasize this because of all of the jurisdictions in which that administer the Uniform Bar Exam, the UBE, and New York is one of them, the one that most foreign attorneys will qualify to sit for is New York. So we have the largest concentration of foreign trained attorneys taking the UBE in New York of anywhere. That 35%, that figure, basically just a little over a third of all applicants, is a number that I think should give foreign applicants some real concern. I talked to lots of applicants who were trained in foreign countries who are taking the bar exam, particularly the UBE. And in general, what I find is that they are really unaware of the challenge that faces them on this exam. Oftentimes, there are language challenges. There's certainly background and training challenges. There's cultural challenges in some case. Often there's financial challenges because it's not easy coming here and studying and doing what you have to do. But the thing that I find most surprising is the really lack of understanding of the overall process and the difficulty that goes into this. I hear from foreign trained attorneys who think they can study for 8 or 9 weeks doing what they did in their home countries and pass these exams. And the reality is that that just doesn't happen. If you're a foreign trained attorney and you're going to sit for the New York UBE exam, I think you need a minimum of 6 months to be prepared. So as I'm recording today, there's no way you should be thinking about the July 2019 exam if you're foreign trained. You should be looking at February or July of 2020 at the earliest. And I think if you don't give yourself enough time to prepare, and if you don't get a competent course to prepare, you're in deep trouble. You know, the number of foreign attorneys I talk to who say that they bought some course in their home country that guaranteed that they would pass the New York bar is just ridiculous. I mean, there is no such thing. It's a sham and it's a fake. And if that's how you're going to study, you're going to be surprised. Likewise, if you think you're just going to buy somebody's old books or listen to some podcasts or my old YouTube videos and pass, that's also not going to work for the most part. Now, I do have to say, I got a very nice note from a Russian-trained foreign attorney who passed the New York bar, who said that he did it primarily by listening to my podcasts and YouTube materials, and that was very kind. But I got to tell you, that's the one in 1,000 persons that's going to do it that way. And for most of you, it just doesn't happen. So I really want to encourage you, if you're a repeat bar taker in New York, or you're a foreign trained attorney in New York, you have to give yourself enough time and you have to be willing to put in the resources, I think, to be successful on this exam. Look, there's just no way to do a cheap, quick, I'm just going to buy some questions on the internet and pass the exam. It's just not happening. And I think we need to burst that bubble and sort of blow up that misconception about the test. Can you pass the New York bar? Sure. I'm pleased that we see first-time takers doing better when we take the entirety of all of the first-time takers in the New York exam in February. So all the ABA schools, the out-of-state ABA schools, the foreign educated first-time takers, and so on, we get a pass rate of 61%. So if you really want an accurate first-time rate, it's 61%, not 72%. And if you want a really accurate rate, it's 45% overall. So if you failed the New York bar exam, take heart. You were one of many people that failed. The majority of people that took the exam did not pass. But it's possible to be successful. The other thing is that we have had great success at Celebration Bar Review, helping people in the UBE get to the threshold where they at least pass the 260 and wave into another UBE state and then come back and do New York. And if you want to hear more about that, I'd be glad to talk with you. There's a button on our show notes page for a free consultation, and I'd be glad to walk you through that strategy. We've used it successfully. We've interviewed a number of our students who used the strategy and were successful, and I would encourage you to check that out. It may be a situation where really sitting for the New York exam and the 266 required score is not your best option. So that's what we see in New York. Pass rates declining, certainly a lower number than we had seen in the past. The press release from the New York Bar Examiners talked about a 3% increase in their pass rate from February 2018, but that was in their first-time taker rate. So you really got to be careful. These are well-crafted, cleverly written pieces that don't always tell you the entire story. All right, well, turning our attention to Texas for a moment, what happened there? Well, in Texas, we've got an interesting circumstance as well. Again, the number that you're probably going to hear is a 68% pass rate in Texas. That's the number, again, for first-time applicants on the exam in February. But the overall pass rate in Texas was only 53%. Now, it's good news, it's over 50%. Frankly, these days, I'm happy anytime we get over 50%. But the repeater pass rate in Texas was 43%. So again, if you're a repeat bar taker in Texas, 43%. And like New York, we have a substantial number of foreign trained attorneys who sit for the exam. The first-time pass rate for those foreign-trained attorneys in Texas was 21%. The pass rate for repeaters, and this was interesting, it was 25%. It was actually higher for repeat bar takers. And here's why I think that happened. A lot of the people that I worked with on the Texas bar who were successful were repeat bar takers who had had more time now to study and prepare and figure out what they needed to do. And I think that's the reason that's a higher rate, weirdly enough, than the first-time rate. That's one of the few times we see that anomaly. And it's still not great. I mean, 25% pass rate is nothing to be excited about. But I think it reflects the fact that first-time takers are woefully unprepared for this exam if they're foreign-trained attorneys. So something to keep in mind. Now, when we get to the pass rates for first-timers versus repeaters in every other category, like the people that went to Texas law schools, first-time rate is 69% passing. The repeat bar taker rate was 46%. And then out-of-state law schools, it drops to 56% for first-time takers and 43% for repeaters. What does that mean? Well, the Texas bar exam is highly idiosyncratic. Subjects like Texas oil and gas, Texas procedure and evidence are really something that if you have not spent time learning and getting comfortable and familiar with, you're going to be at a significant disadvantage. And as you can see, it's more than a 10-point difference even for first-time takers. But again, when we get to the repeat bar takers, here's what happens. The Texas Law School repeaters had a 46% pass rate, but the out-of-state law school repeaters had a 43% pass rate. In other words, the drop-off's nowhere near as great for them as it is for out-of-state law students, first-time takers. Why? Because out-of-state law students who don't use a competent Texas bar review don't know what they're talking about. They just go in and they get creamed by some of these subjects, and it shows. And it shows with a 13% difference in the pass rate. So that's certainly significant, I think, when you look at it. Now, to be clear, there were only 247 people that took the bar exam for the first time from Texas law school. So we're not talking about a big group of people. And there were 253 non-Texas first-time takers. So we had more non-Texas takers than Texas first-time takers. But when we get to the repeaters, and this is interesting, the total first-time takers in Texas for February 2019 was an even 500 people. But the repeaters were 694. So there are more people taking the bar exam as repeaters than first timers. And we're seeing that all across the country. Again, I want to dispel the mythology that the exam is all about first time takers. In February, it is never about all first time takers. And here, as we saw in New York, you've got a wild disparity between repeaters and first time takers. Now, is it possible to be successful on the Texas exam? Well, sure it is. But we've got a theory about how to handle the Texas exam that I think is a little different. And let me just offer it to you in brief. And then if you'd like to talk with me about it in more detail, again, there's a link for you to check out. Texas will be switching from their specific exam, state-specific exam, to the Uniform Bar Exam in February 2021. Now that's, as we're talking today, that's 3 exams away. We've got the July 2019, both exams in 2020, and then in 2021, they switched to the UBE. Well, I've been talking with some students who failed their Texas bar exams in February 2019, and they came to us, and I suggested that they consider sitting for the Uniform Bar Exam in one of these next 3 administrations of the exam in a state other than Texas for a couple of reasons. One is, if they get admitted with a score there, it's possible that that score will be able to wave into Texas. We don't know that yet for sure, but following the example of New York and some other states that switched to the UBE, it looks like that would be possible. In addition, it gives you the opportunity to practice the UBE before it comes up in Texas in February of 2021. And I think probably most importantly in some respects, when a state has made the decision to move from its state exam to the UBE, What we have seen in states like Illinois, Massachusetts, New York, North Carolina, some others, Tennessee, is that the state exam really starts to lag. You have fewer people taking the state-specific exam because they're sitting out and waiting for the UBE or going somewhere else to take the UBE in anticipation of the change. And the overall trend in those last couple of administrations of the state-specific exam has generally been a lower pass rate. So in our view, if you're a Texas bar taker, unless you absolutely have to be licensed in Texas in 2020, you may be better off switching to the UBE, taking that exam and getting licensed, and then making a decision about what to do in 2021 with Texas. So again, if you'd like to know more about that strategy, I encourage you to contact me. We've got a link in the show notes for a free consultation, and I'll be glad to explain the strategy and talk about it in the context of your personal circumstances. In any event, I think what we see both in New York and Texas is this notion that pass rates may be up a little, down a little. I mean, both New York and Texas are claiming some slight bump in their scores, but it is a very slight bump. And the overall numbers continue to be pretty discouraging, I think, particularly for repeat takers and in both of these states for foreign law graduates. So, kind of interesting, I'm not sure is the right word, but there's certainly something going on. Now, I want to just transition for just a couple of minutes to talk a little bit about some of the what's being written right now, because there's a fair number of articles and journal publications about what's happening with the multi-state and the data. One of these, probably one of the most significant, is a piece, a three-part piece in law.com written by Karen Sloan, talking about the data of falling bar pass rates in 5 states. Ms. Sloan looked at California, New York, Florida, Texas, and Pennsylvania. So 4 of the 5 states that we specifically work in. And it's an interesting series. I disagree with a fair amount of her conclusions, but I think it's interesting to read and get a sense. She's looked at those 5 states as being 5 big states where the pass rates have declined over the past 5 years or so. And there's certainly no doubt about that. But her basic thesis, I think, is flawed. What she does note, which I think is correct, is that there were significant drops in the passage rate for first-time takers. And then there was, since 2008, so the past decade, there have been significant drops. But if you go back before that to 2005, there were actually some increases in bar pass rates, and that's all correct. But then she makes this interesting statement. Her conclusion is that it's clear, and I'm quoting now, it's clear that the waning demand for a law degree has played a key role in the drop in bar pass rates. I got to say, I just think that's ridiculous. There is nowhere that I think supports that. I think that is a convenient piece of mythology that's promulgated by law schools and by bar examiners to say, in effect, the people taking the bar are just stupid, or they're less competent or less able. And because people don't want to get law degrees now, the theory goes, and it's written, that the law schools dip deeper into the applicant pool and they get a less qualified applicant, and those people don't pass. You know, as somebody that's on the front line working with those people, and I've done this for 30 years, it's just not true. I mean, I can tell you anecdotally, people are not stupider than they were 30 years ago. I think a fair number of those attorneys that passed the bar exam 25 and 30 years ago would fail the exam today, the same as we're seeing right now. The test is qualitatively harder. The grading is harder. The quality of the grading is far worse than it used to be. When I took the bar exam, my bar exams were being graded by professionals, by academics, by people that really knew what they were doing. Today, the bar exams in most major states are graded by gig employees. It's sort of like having your Uber driver grade your bar exam. And it just, I think it's kind of nuts to think that that's the case. I did a podcast about 6 months ago or so, where I talked about what was wrong with the California bar exam. And I talked about this as one of the items that I think is wrong. When you've got a lower quality grader, you're going to get a lower quality result. When you make the test harder, when you raise the passing score dramatically, you're going to get a lower passing rate. And I would challenge these people who think that they are so incredibly talented and brilliant that everyone that came behind them wasn't. Go take a bar exam. Find out what it's like these days. You will be surprised. I work with a lot of practicing attorneys who find themselves in the position of taking the bar exam. in Florida, in California, in other states, and they are stunned at how much harder it is than it was 10, 20, 30 years ago. And so I think that it's just way too simplistic to say we just have a worse applicant pool and that's why the rates are going down. Now I'm going to link to the law.com series of articles in our show notes. I invite you to read those for yourself, but I think it's an interesting approach, and I just don't believe that that's the reason. What we can say for sure is that the multi-state bar exam scores have dropped nationally. We're now at a 34-year low based on the July 2018 exam. Well, what about February 2019? Well, we still haven't gotten all of the numbers out, but what we do know now is that the mean score across the country on the MBE actually went up by 1.2 points. This is according to an article in the New York Law Journal. We'll link to that as well. Now, the National Conference of Bar Examiners, the people that wrote that report, say that this represents the first increase in the mean February score since 2013. Now, remember, this score is not as high as what we see in the July exams. And they point out that not every jurisdiction had an increase in their MBE mean. And that's absolutely true. Florida dropped, Illinois dropped, New York dropped, Texas went up just a small amount. And so I think you got to be careful with these national numbers. What does it mean that we go up 1.2 points? I think not a whole lot. What is also interesting to me is that there were 21,000 people that took the February exam in 2019, compared with 45,000 that took it in July of 2018. So you've got a higher percentage of bar repeaters. You have, therefore, lower pass rates statistically. And you have a 5-point difference between the average MBE score in July and the average MBE score in February. Now, I get this question a lot. People say, well, maybe I shouldn't take the February exam because it's got a lower score. It must be a tougher exam. No, it's not at all. There's no difference at all. The scaling is designed to equate for that. It's that you have more first-time takers in July, and you have more repeaters in February. Now, the other interesting number among many to me in this particular article was that the percentage of people who were taking the bar for the first time in February continued to drop. It's smaller and smaller. It was just 22% of all test takers nationally. I wanted to let that sink in for a minute. 78% of the people that took the bar in February 2019 are bar repeaters. So when you hear that everyone's passing the bar and everyone's taking the big box bar review course and they're all doing great, I just want you to remember that 78% of the people sitting in the room failed. And the vast majority of those people that failed took the big box bar review. So you tell me, I am bewildered by why people continue to believe the nonsense that's spewed from these companies. I guess if you put enough money into your marketing, you can say anything and people will believe it. But really, folks, you went to law school, you should be smarter than this. And when you see those numbers, you got to know that what you're being taught in law school for the bar or in the big box bar reviews for the bar doesn't work. And so this number of 78% that were repeat bar takers should give a lot of people some pause. Now, apparently it didn't bother the National Conference of Bar Examiners all that much. I'm quoting from the same article, and this truly, I was gobsmacked by this comment from Judith Gunderson, who's the president of the NCBE. She's a very talented, very capable leader. She's done a great deal of work in the field. But here's what she says. They talk about the fact that the average MBE score for February was somewhat higher than expected, and repeat test takers saw a larger increase in their MBE score than did first-time takers. Now I'm quoting from the article. That surprised us a little, Gunderson said. It's great that the repeaters improved so much, but what does that mean? I don't know. Did people study differently or did they put more time into it? Our researchers are looking into it. Part of it for us is that there's a lot we don't know. We don't know what people did to prepare for the exam. We don't know about their curriculum choices, end quote. Ms. Gunderson, all you got to do is ask. We're right here. We're licensed by the National Conference. We've been preparing more students every exam, and they're doing better. That's one reason, for sure. Certainly in the big states like Florida, New York, California, Texas, Georgia, I think it's making a difference. In the UBE, it's certainly making a difference. But I want to go back to something I said about the results in New York and Texas. When people have more time to study, when they can see that the initial approach that they took to the bar didn't work and they change their approach, they do something different, which just happens to be the name of our webinar that we offer, then results go up. Is this a big surprise or a big shock? It shouldn't be. people are doing things differently. Look, there's no wisdom in doing the same thing and failing over and over again. And I think the fact that it's surprising to the national conference that the results are going up suggests that they haven't really done a very in-depth look at how people are studying and why courses like ours are succeeding for people who were not successful before. So frankly, if you're someone who's failed the exam and you're discouraged, I think your answer is right there. You got to do something different. Your curriculum has to be different, and your approach has to be different if you're going to have a different result. Or it might be, as the article concludes, it might have just been some bad luck from test takers in July, and there were some more near fails than previous years. That came from a professor at Pepperdine, University of Law, by the name of Derek Muller. Professor Muller, if you really are trying to tell us that the bar exam is a result of bad luck and near luck, I don't want to be in your class. So there you go. There's some of the information that's out there. One other point I want to make about some of the numbers that you're hearing talked about right now. The bar pass rate for people that graduated law school in 2016, within 2 years of graduating, is now 88%. That's a good number. And you would think, well, that means first-time pass rate's 88% nationally. No, that's not what it means. What it means is that 88% of the people that took the bar exam up to 4 times eventually passed. And what it doesn't tell you is how many of those people passed on try 1, 2, 3, and 4. The point I want to make is that if you're in that try 2, 3, or 4, it doesn't feel like you're a first-time passer or a first-time bar taker, and it certainly doesn't feel like you've had great success. And so when you hear an aggregated number like that, you got to be really careful, because really what it says to me is people try, they fail, then they reset themselves maybe after a second try the same way that didn't work, and then they do something different, and then they get a passing result. Can you pass the bar? Absolutely. That's what that number tells me. 88% of the people that take the bar can pass. But what it also should tell us is that it takes 4 tries for 88% of the people to pass, and that should be unacceptable. And I hope that you kind of get the flavor of the statistical number game that's being played here. You know, we're trying to put a lipstick on a pig when we talk about these pass rates. The pass rates are low, they're bad, and the exam is tough. And if you keep doing what you've been doing, you're going to keep getting the same result. And for a majority of people taking the bar exam today, that result is failure. And so the only way you can do that is to flip the script and do something different. So I want to invite you, if you're in that circumstance, obviously to contact me, but also I want to invite you to attend a free training that we're doing on Thursday night at 7 p.m. It's called Do Something Different. Make the next bar exam your last bar exam. And it's a way of looking at the bar and working through the step-by-step process that changes this set of numbers, that takes you from the failing side of the ledger to the passing side of the ledger. We'll include lots of case studies. You'll hear from people who've done that successfully over the years, and we'll show you exactly what you have to do to make it happen. It's completely free, but you do need to register, and the registration button will be on the show notes page. But you can also go right to our website at celebrationbarreview.com/webinar, celebrationbarreview.com/webinar, and sign up. And then 7 p.m. Thursday night, attend this training. I think it will change your life if you're a repeater on the bar exam for sure. And even if you're a first-time taker, you ought to find out what it is you need to do to avoid becoming a bar repeater. So I hope you'll join us Thursday, 7 p.m. All right, well, that's our bonus episode for this week. Lots of information about New York, about Texas, about bar numbers in general. I know it's a lot to absorb and take in. We'll put links to all these articles in our show notes, and I encourage you to read them and check them out and think about them yourself. And then we'll be back to you again on Wednesday with our next episode. We've got lots of great interviews with people that overcame these numbers and were successful, and they'll be sharing with you exactly what they did and how they got to be successful on the exam. So I hope you'll stick around for that, and we will see you along the extra mile as you study for your bar exam. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to the Extra Mile podcast for bar exam takers at www.celebrationbarreview.com.